So the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, when underlining this morning that business must lead the transition, she spoke about the battery industry. She spoke about its strategic importance for cleaner and more digital environment, and indeed, she said, for our prosperity and for our security. And Mara Sefcovic talked about the European Battery Alliance as a poster child, if you will, for what we need to do to achieve the climate neutrality objectives. So we could have no one better, ladies and gentlemen, before we break for lunch. We're going to hear from a pioneer of the green economy and the technologies we need to get there. He'll tell you all about his company. I am delighted to welcome to the stage Carl-Erik Lagercrantz, chairman and co-founder of Northvolt. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much to previous speakers and to what has been said during the day so far. I think it's been really interesting and a lot of it very supporting for the transition from an industry perspective. So I'm really happy for that. So I'm just going to, if we look at where we are today from a Northvolt perspective, I'm going to give you a background because the background is important. We have, as we all know, a very, very dire situation, and I think we all are aware of this, and we all look into this in different ways. You know, we have politicians here, we have industrialists here, we have, in a way, entrepreneurs, myself, people who are trying to drive change. I think we all have the same goal, very clear today, but we are in different situations. And just to say, when you look at this picture, there is a lot of what I would like to say sometimes stranded assets in the world. Therefore, it's super important that you let loose the opportunity for new technology, new disruption taking place, because that's where you will find the key, you know, the key to the future. Very hard if you are in an industry where you're super reliant on cash flows, super reliant on existing of assets in your balance sheet to make that super disruptive step. So that's just one. Looking at this picture, we have this situation at our hands. So green batteries, what are we all about? Well, I am from the industry. I've worked in the telecoms industry for many, many years. And I set up an investment company where I wanted to make sure that I focus on the right things, the right macro trends, where I really believe, where I can, you know, one thing, to make sure that I build new industry, but also that I am attached to super strong macro trends. So I have another company, I have a private investment company, so we do what we believe in. I have another company where I'm the chairman of, which builds power backup for mobile base stations. One of the largest suppliers for power backup, that is in itself battery cells, and then we build technology around that. That is supplied into the telecom infrastructure companies like the Nokia and like the Ericsson, but also directly to operators all over the world in order to create more resilient networks when you have power failure. Super important. We are the majority owners of this company. I am sitting at a board meeting and I'm thinking, I am solely supplied in this very small vertical, industry vertical. I'm solely supplied by the Asian market for battery cells, where I add technology and we then transform this into a super product around the world. But in this case, 60% of my bill of material are these battery cells. Would that be, is that sustainable? This company is a tremendous growth company, but with a great risk. So thinking about that, I started to look at what's happening in the States about electrification of cars. Elon Musk, he goes and does what is a vertical integration. Why? Because he wants to control his own value chain in order to transform such a large industry and actually to build a car in a world where, you know, to go head on with the world of cars, it's a super challenging proposition in itself. But he had one idea. He could not do it without making that vertical integration, because nowhere on earth there were enough batteries for him to conquer the world. So he set up his factory in Nevada. And he did that with the assistance of a person named Peter Carlson, who's today the CEO of Northvolt. He worked then for 5 years setting up the factory in Nevada and working very closely with Elon Musk. I just saw this. there was a Swedish guy, I'm Swedish myself, there was a Swedish guy who had run this and made this and put this into operation. He just stepped out of Tesla. I wanted to do something. I wanted to assess if there was an opportunity to build such a value chain in Europe. Would there be, all of the drivers that would be needed? So I gave him a call. I asked him to come over to Europe. We sat down and we financed a pre-study to see where and what do you need in order to build a highly competitive, on a global level, battery manufacturer to build the world's greenest batteries. Because we sincerely believe that that would be the prerequisites. So that was the start for what we're doing. If you look at the industry, how big is it? It's a huge industry. So we decided there was good enough reasons to do it. And we also made sure that we found the right geography to build such a factory in order to create that long-term competitive, on a global basis, company. How is this transformation taking place? This is New York 1900. You see one car and the rest is carriages. And just to get a glimpse of what's going on and what do you need to be prepared for, because you can't sit around and wait for this to happen. This is 13 years later. You have one carriage and the rest is cars. And this is the beginning. At that point in time, you didn't have the well-oiled value chain set up. It just you just need to do all of that, and still you're able to achieve that, as an example, in 13 years. So this is what we had in the north of Sweden in the beginning of 2019. This is what we have 13 months later. And this is what I think is super important here. And that is looking at what we're doing. We raised 1 billion of equity, and on top of that, convertible equity. We have one factory in operation in Sweden, which is an industrialization factory in Västerås, which is really the heartland of Swedish companies such like ABB and Westinghouse. It's the electromechanical heartland. So we have a 20,000 square meter industrialization factory, which is a process replica of all of the other factories that we are building. Because we, of course, have a couple of key elements in what we're doing. We have a very collaborative approach. Very early on, we wanted to make sure that we have an alignment of interest with the industry that needs to transform, with an industry that do not want to rely on China, South Korea as the sole supplier if their long-term strategy is going to be solid. If their long-term strategy is going to be electrification in the transportation industry or in the electrification of power generation. If it is where you need batteries at different parts of the value chain continuously, if that's going to happen, you cannot rely on outside of Europe Chinese or South Korean predominantly. Therefore, our approach was that we wanted to create an enabler, somebody who worked very closely with these key companies, also our customers, since these companies want to develop a value chain to create more resilience from a supply if they're going to achieve their long-term strategy. So all of these companies that you see here are partners, industrial partners, where we develop products together with them for their own long-term strategy. And if you look at BMW and Volkswagen, and all of these are also shareholders, but the big ones are Volkswagen and BMW, because they want to, of course, in a way, accelerate this in order for themselves to accelerate their own transition. So this has been a sort of a key stepping stone. We're building this factory in Skellefteå, which is, and then we're building another factory outside of Salzgitter in Germany, together with Volkswagen. And another important part of this is that you look at how are you able to finance these type of factories? I mean, we are putting almost 3.5 billion euros into these factories. Well, yet again, it's about having these collaborative approach. These companies, especially the large ones, the transportation companies here, they are, putting orders in. So we have pre-sold all of the factory in Skellefteå for a total of $13 billion already. That's the basis for building it. Same thing in Salzgitter in Germany, which is solely for Volkswagen. Super important for them, also from a labor transition perspective, where they are looking at this in order to, they have a combustion engine factory with 8,000 employees in Salzgitter. How are you going to persuade this, all of these workers and all of the stakeholders, the politicians, to actually want to make that move, unless you have a very solid case for the future? So yet again, that transformation taking place, we're building that battery manufacturing next door, and then it's suddenly a viable step to take for the stakeholders. I talked a little bit about the cost competitive industry. Super, super important. What we're also doing is we are challenging the norm of the battery manufacturing industry. We are vertically integrating also the manufacturing of batteries, where we are combining the active material preparation, which is a super energy intensive process at many stages. And then we are adding that the normal manufacturing of batteries. So these two together makes, in combination with scale, the world's lowest cost of manufacturing batteries, where you include these. And the big reason for that is, in the northern Sweden, you have the world's lowest cost of energy. We have a highly optimized, highly digitized factory so the labor arbitrage is close to zero. What we have been shipping over, we talked a lot today about having previously shipped out a lot of what is our industry, I would say, backbone that we built out over many years. And my view is so strong that with the prerequisites of going green, with the green agenda that has been talked about today, and looking at the opportunities we have around, specifically in this case, low-cost energy, you're able to in a way, recreate industry backbone, because this is a key. As you saw before, the value of this is super important for this market to transition as such. Therefore, Mario Sefcovic, Vice President, is very clear on this is a key cornerstone for us. So the energy sourcing, creating that extremely cost-competitive industry, and the greenness of the energy is, of course, another part which we talked about. How much CO2 are you building into your product overall? Super important. And therefore, the geography and the location is super important. If you look at what's important for us, a lot of what we talked around before, I think the close collaboration on the public funding. We have worked a lot with EIB, we worked a lot with the Commission on this, and I see the industry and the EU and the EIB all working together towards the same goal is one super important part if we together are going to transform industry. And I see, we are talking now and I'm presenting now on the battery industry. I see other industries which have the same opportunity, and I'm clear, and I want to make sure that we, as a European, I want to make sure that I'm supporting this in the best and most appropriate way. And if you look at what we do want to have is, one thing is framework. Of course, it is extremely supportive if we can have a very wholesome framework from a European perspective around recycling and the circular economy. So we have a very close collaboration with the Commission, and we work closely with them in order to make sure that we are, and I think one super important point, not subsidizing industry, because I think that's not a good idea. I don't like that. I think creating a level playing field is super important. Therefore, I think the relevance of the carbon tax across, because if we have a certain strategy and agenda, you want to make sure that is with a level playing field. So I think on looking at this, I think we the transparency around carbon footprint is something that if you are able to enforce that over time for every product that we believe is important from a European perspective, I think we actually doing that and daring to be in the forefront of that, we are actually pushing the world in the right direction, which I think has a value in itself. It's not about being pushed into. It's about, pulling forward in order to create a competitive situation. Because if we are number one in this area, over time, it's not going to be, well, I'm semi-transparent, and because I'm not so good on carbon, and therefore that product is going to sell. That product is not going to sell in the market in 5, 10, 15 years. So what we are now seeing and what Ursula von der Leyen, President today, told us, I think is super important, and I'm super supportive for her agenda.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking Carl-Erik very much indeed? Thank you.